Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Black Queer Unapologetic. I'm JoJo, and today's episode is called And Tired of Performing Success. And if that sentence hits you in the chest, because it definitely did with me a couple months ago, it's probably because you know exactly what I mean. And this isn't about quitting a job, even though I just quit mine. It's not about burnout or I guess buzzwords. It's about what happens when success becomes something that you perform instead of something that you are living. And especially if you're a black man, a black woman, black person, a person of color, if you grew up understanding without anyone ever saying it out loud that you had to be on all the time, and then that was the price of being safe. And this episode is not just my story. It's aiming to be a mirror, I suppose, to reflect back what I've seen in others and what I've seen in myself, because a lot of us have been doing everything right and quietly asking ourselves, why am I still tired? So let's get into it and discuss why we are so damn tired. Let's go.
Ay, black, queer, unapologetic. Black, queer, unapologetic. I know who I am, now you know what I'm about. I say the thoughts in my head out loud. Let's get into it, let's pick up the flow though. Brought to you by the one they call JoJo. Black, queer, unapologetic. Black, queer, unapologetic. Let's go.
So for many of us, the pressure to succeed didn't start at work. It started at home, whether, it might have been school or something like that, but not in a cruel way, just like in a protective way. Parents who knew that the world wouldn't be gentle with us and parents who understood consequences before we did. So they pushed us hard and they wanted us to be better and they wanted us to be careful and impressive. It's not our parents' fault, but they didn't want us to give anybody a reason to treat us lesser than. That kind of pressure, though, doesn't come from ego. It comes from fear. And when you grow up in that environment, success stops being about curiosity or fulfillment, and success becomes armor to protect yourself. You're not giving anybody a reason to treat you any different. You're not giving anybody a reason to say that you don't know what you're doing or you're lesser than or you're unqualified. The list goes on. Right. And you get to a point where you don't rest because resting even for too long just feels unsafe. You don't slow down because slowing down feels irresponsible, like you should be doing something. We're taught to be productive. You don't question systems because questioning exposes you to risk. So you keep it moving and you stay achieving and you stay on all the time. And eventually you forget what success was supposed to feel like in your body. And it's not supposed to feel, at least for me, like super impressive or super respectable. I wanted my success to feel peaceful. But the part that doesn't get said enough is that you can do everything right. You can meet the society standard for success and still be treated like you don't belong there. A lot of us have watched people with less experience and less depth, less accountability move ahead of us, not because they were better, but because they were more, let's just say, familiar. They fit the picture better. They sounded more correct for the role. Someone knew them socially. Referrals don't even get you started. Meanwhile, we're expected to prove ourselves over and over again, not just once. Every meeting, every role, every transition to a new manager, to a new team, to a new company, our tone gets policed. Confidence gets misread as cocky or aggressive. Your authority gets questioned, and it's subtle sometimes, but other times it's just straight up in your face. And it shows up as, let's circle back, or that's not the tone we're looking for. You're being a little too intense. And what's really being said is make us more comfortable. You're making us uncomfortable. And after a while, you just start to internalize it like, okay, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I should be changing myself to be more X, Y, and Z. You start second guessing yourself, editing yourself mid sentence, taking long pauses to think about what you want to say, even though you already know what you would like to say, and explaining things that you shouldn't have to explain. Not because you lack confidence, but because you're tired of being misunderstood. So if you've been through all of that, then you probably understand that feeling that comes from being in those spaces and trying to be yourself and trying to also come across as being, a subject matter expert or as proficient in your field. And when all that policing kicks in and people start telling you that, you need to start being this way or that way, and the goalpost keeps moving, those survival conditions can turn into self-betrayal. When you're raised to survive and to succeed and taught a specific version of what success looks like, you learn how to accept less than what you want and less than what you deserve because that's all you've been told to believe that is allowed. And you learn how to be grateful for crumbs and how to tolerate disrespect and how to stay quiet because at least you're being included or tolerated. This is what I like to call kissing the hand that beats you. You tell yourself, this is just how it works. This is the price of success. This is what I have to deal with to get ahead. And over time, your standards start to shrink. Being overlooked starts to feel normal, and being undervalued starts to feel expected. And it's exhausting. And that exhaustion starts to feel permanent. Not because it is right. I want to make that clear. It's not because it is right, but because that feeling starts to feel familiar. And when you're familiar with something, it starts to feel normal. And it doesn't just stop at work, because that's just one part of our lives. And I'm going to say this, and some people probably going to disagree with me, but dating mirrors those same patterns. If you're too successful, people feel intimidated, or they can feel that way. And if you're not successful enough, then you feel judged, or you can be judged. So it ends up being this balance of too much or not enough. So people start shaping themselves around what they think is acceptable and appropriate, explaining their transitions and downplaying their ambitions, over justifying rest periods. But here's the truth that took a long time for me to learn. If someone only values you when you're performing, when you're in a constant state of success, they do not want partnership. They want reassurance. They want stability without doing the work that is required of them in a partnership. They want the version of you that makes them feel safe. And to me, that's not love. That's projection. Sorry, boo. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that whether it's career, whether it's dating, it isn't separate from everything else that I've been talking about. It's the same pattern. At work, you're performing to be valued. In dating, you're performing to be chosen. And after a while, you just start to realize that you've been performing your entire life. You've been editing yourself. molding yourself into something else that isn't really you, managing other people's comforts and expectations, trying to be just enough of who you are without being labeled as too much. And as time passes, it really just disconnects you from yourself. You stop knowing what you actually want and if those wants change because you've been so focused on what other people need from you or want you to be. And you stop trusting your instincts because you've been taught that your first reaction is probably wrong and you need to slow down and stop being too much, probably being too sensitive or being told that that's not how things work or you should be a certain way. So you start second guessing everything. You overanalyze. You ask yourself, am I being reasonable? When what you really mean is, am I allowed to do this? Are people going to judge me for this? Am I being too cringe? Am I being too much? You are allowed to be who you are. I don't even know why we question that. You are allowed to be who you are unapologetically. And if you are unapologetically an asshole, then so be it. But say that shit with your chest. If that's who you want to be, then do it. But when you've been spending years being told directly and indirectly that your feelings are inconvenient and your boundaries are unreasonable and that your standards are too high, you start to believe it. And you start thinking that the problem is you and that you're asking for too much, that you need to be more flexible, more understanding, more patient. Flexibility, though, isn't supposed to mean bending until you break. I think it means bending within reason. And that's where the anger comes in. When I say anger, I'm not talking about the loud kind, the outbursts, the crash outs. I'm not talking about the kind that gets you in trouble. I'm talking about the quiet anger that sits in your chest when you finally realize I've been making myself smaller for people who were never going to make space for me anyway. And the anger that comes from recognizing how much energy you've spent managing other people's feelings and how they feel about you, while your own feelings have been pushed aside. The anger from watching people with half your qualifications get opportunities that you had to fight for and still didn't get. And from being told that you're intimidating when you're just confident or that you're not leadership material when you've been conditioned to be quiet. Don't get me started on the code switching and then forgetting what your actual voice sounds like. And a lot of us, especially Black men, especially queer folks, especially people who've had to navigate white spaces to survive, we have been taught early that anger would cost us everything. So you can't get mad at work. You can't confront things. So you swallow it. You redirect it to something else. And then you turn it into productivity and perfectionism, and that's worse. And trying to prove that you belong. If you don't have a place to put that anger, it can turn inward and it can turn into depression and anxiety, and it becomes physical where you can feel it in your body. And then you start to feel like, oh, I can't keep doing this. And if you're sitting there right now thinking like, yeah, like I felt that before, that's not a weakness. That's just a reality. And your body is basically telling you what's up. It's being honest with you. So if you feel angry about something right now, whether it's work or dating, whatever, people trying to turn you into something that you're not, that means that you're still paying attention. And that means that you haven't completely numbed out, which is a good thing. Anger is information. It tells you something important that maybe that thing that's making you mad is not supposed to be in your life, or you need to address it, figure out a way to address it in a healthy way. Something that is not productive, but healing, I guess. For the longest time, I thought the answer was just to work harder, like at everything, whether it was dating, whether it was at work, in my professional life. Like I've gone on dates with people who have definitely been trying to sell me an image of who they are, not being exactly like who they actually are, but sell me an image of who they are and are putting on. And I think it's the same thing that I'm talking about right now. They're trying to be better, to be undeniable, to be so good that you can't ignore them or us, because I've done it too. I'm not gonna act like I haven't. So when I've done that, my little story, I spent the last 10 years in my career field and I worked at 8 different companies. And I thought that if I could just get to the right place, make the right money, have the right title, I'd finally feel secure. But the thing about this system that we live in, when I say system, I'm talking about just like the system of society and the way that it unfortunately works. And we can get into that. That's a whole nother conversation. But the system wasn't built for certain types of people. It just wasn't. Because even when you do feel safe inside that system, you know, you found the job, you have the right manager, you're in the right environment, all those things. Nothing is permanent. You might get a new manager. You might work for a different company. You might contract for somebody else. The goalpost just keeps moving. For me, it was like get the degree, which I didn't do because I'm like, I don't like school. Then it was get certified, get into the startup, get into a well-funded company, make the 6 figures. And every single time I hit those goals, that feeling of having to be good enough to be successful did not go away because I felt like I was chasing safety, not so much actual success. And you can't find safety in a system that was designed to pull everything out of you by giving you just enough back to keep you hooked. And I've watched people fail upward and watched people who were more on the mediocre side get rewarded with potential, saying that they have potential, and me needing to have a perfect track record to just even be seen and considered. And I've watched people get second and third chances while I was expected to be flawless. And this isn't just corporate America. This is my personal experiences as an athlete, as being in the military, as having gone into corporate and tech and all of that bullshit. I guess what I've learned from all of this, though, is that you have to choose yourself. What makes you happy? What makes you feel like yourself? What puts you in a position to achieve the things that you want, but also doesn't force you to sacrifice who you are or your morals or beliefs or ethics and things like that. Choosing yourself doesn't have to look like what people think it is. It doesn't have to be dramatic. For me, it looked like just basically saying, I'm not doing this anymore. And turning down opportunities that I knew would drain me, even if people didn't understand why I was saying no to those opportunities. And it looked like me doing things that made other people confused. Like, why would you do that? Or why would you say that? Or why would you say no to that? And letting them think that I was being less ambitious and less driven and less committed, because the alternative to continuing to sacrifice my mental health and my energy to maintain this image of like, oh, you've made it, you're successful, you have these things. None of that shit was real in the first place. So choosing yourself can be simple shit. Like, I'm taking the day off and not explaining why, and not justifying and not apologizing for it. Use your fucking sick day. You can rest. You don't need to send a 3-paragraph explanation. And the wild part is that the more that I did stuff like that, the more I realized how much of my life I had built around other people's expectations and how much I'd been performing and the energy that I was spending on other people trying to somewhat earn a right to exist in certain spaces, you don't need permission to stop doing this. Like, you can just do it. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to be willing to trust that you deserve better than constant survival mode. And I know that that can be scary because it is a deviation from a path that we were taught to be on, but survival feels familiar, but it's just not healthy. And choosing yourself isn't reckless. It's not. And self trust isn't about having all the answers, and it's not about appearing to have it all together to outside society. It's just about believing that choosing yourself won't destroy your life. So I'm going to say this to end it. You don't need to prove anything to anybody. And you don't need to earn your rest. And you don't need permission to choose yourself. And you are allowed to stop performing. And if you do that, that's not a failure. That's you just choosing your freedom. You don't need to be perfect in other people's eyes. I'm not being perfect today. Shit. All these fucking cars driving up and down the street ruining my train of thought. I don't know if you guys can hear that in the background. You know, you don't need to demand perfection from people. We're all human, and if we all choose to stop performing, we can fully be ourselves. And I think that there's something beautiful in that. So, yeah. Thank you for listening. And if this hit something in you, I hope that you share it with somebody that might need it. And more importantly, stay Black, stay queer. And if you are neither, always stay unapologetic. And I will see you on the next one.